Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here. And taking a Monday evening off from family is not easy. So I really understand that it's a real privilege to have the opportunity to speak here tonight. And I'm so thankful to Liz and Megan and those who have embraced us. This is an incredible organization, educational institution. And, just I'm thinking about it in the context of what's happening in our world, what a light it is to have a Christian school and to be able to send your children to a Christian school. That's not something we can take for granted. And I'm certainly thinking about my grandchild. I have 3 kids, by the way, and I have a grandchild, and my wife is here with me today, and my oldest daughter. I miss my granddaughter, though. I know exactly where she would be, though. She would be up here. So it's a great honor. And like Liz said in the beginning, in the intro, I am the founder and the CEO of Saga Mental Health and Relationship Centers. And we have right now 35 therapists in our network, and I hope that I can share a little bit about Saga in the end of my presentation. But when we were kind of chatting what we should talk about today, I said, Megan, Liz, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, well, how about culture and teenagers and mental health? And I thought to myself, that's like a series of things, but I thought, oh, that's a really exciting topic, actually. So it kind of forced me to do the research because I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a master's of divinity and I have a master's of psychology. So I work with families, I work with couples, I work with individuals. I specialize in trauma and mood disorders. It's for me to bring together these things and to begin to understand. I want you to focus on basically 3 things to keep in mind when we talk about the complexity of our culture today. I want you to think about the brain. I want you to think about the central nervous system. And I want you to think about our faith in Jesus Christ. These 3 things, because they are it's really all about that. Everything else that's the core. So when I was thinking about how I should approach this topic, I remembered I had a very interesting encounter in 2008. I was flying from Iceland to Los Angeles, and I stopped. We always have to stop over somewhere, so we stopped. This time I stopped over in Minneapolis, and that's where I met a gentleman. I actually had to stay a night at the hotel, and early in the morning I was in this shuttle, and it was kind of this air shuttle, little cars they have. And the seats were kind of designed like you're facing the person. So there was one gentleman that walked in, looked very much like Sean Connery. And it was like, wow, it really caught my attention, And then when you're sitting like that, and you have to sit like that for about 40 minutes, you kind of have to speak up. Or you put your earpods on, and knowing that I like to chat with people, I like to talk, I begin to talk. And so we begin to exchange some information about, what you do and all that. And so it was his turn to share what he did. So I told him I was a pastor coming from Iceland and I was on my way to LA. We talked a little bit about that, and it was his turn. So he worked for the White House, and he was on a research team. He was an engineer from a very prestigious school here in the United States on the West Coast. And he told me that he was actually doing an investigation. I don't know if some of you remember when the bridges collapsed back in Minnesota back in 2007. It was a very tragic thing. And so it happened. And he said, I'm basically doing a research, what happened to those bridges? And so I kept asking him, and I said to him, so when did you start working for the White House? Obviously the next question, right? Oh, it was started around 9/11. I was actually on the research, we were doing the investigation, what happened to Twin Towers. And so I want to put the picture up of the Twin Towers here. Yeah. And so when he was talking to me, he said, the interesting thing, so what did you find out? I asked him. So believe it or not, I got to that point. And he said to me, the tower should never have collapsed. And I was like, really? So what went wrong? They weren't built by the book. And that spoke to me in a very, very deep way in that moment. How do we build our lives today? And that's really a question that I want to kind of leave with you for right now. And I want to visit that question a little bit later on. Because it's never been more important to build our lives by the book than right now. And so it would have saved a lot of lives, right? If those planes would have just been stuck in those towers. So I want to kind of start with a question. Raise your hand if you've ever felt concerned about the impact of social media on your teenagers' mental health and well-being. Okay. Now, keep your hand raised if you've also experienced moments of worry about the toxic stress our kids face in today's fast-paced digital world, and how many of you can relate to these challenges. And you can continue to lift up your hands if you want, but my next question is, are you concerned about gender identity issues and how they might be impacting your children? Can I see hands here? Okay. So this is a very, I guess I'm doing this on two. So this is a very, this is kind of this is the big picture. And as you see, we have self-definition, we have larger societal context, and we have the institutional impact, we have community, school, family. And so this is kind of like a big picture of really setting the stage for how these forces and powers in our society, in our culture, impact one another. And we know that, just to kind of give you an example, that trust was broken in our society during and after COVID. I've sometimes said the social contract was shattered, and there's very little or limited trust that we have experienced. And as a nation, I want to say that we have lost trust in our healthcare system. We have lost trust in the educational system, justice and legal system, politics, media, even research and science. We don't trust any of this, what's happening today. And just imagine what the impact that we turn it into this macro system has on the individual and how we define ourselves as people. And so this has obviously greatly impacted how we, as society, see other people. We kind of begin to file people. Are you a Trump or Biden supporter? Are you a Republican or Democrat? Do you watch Fox or CNN? What sexual pronoun do I use? I can't really say that because it can cause a lot of misunderstanding. And I don't really know how to operate like that and function like that and talk like that because I'm an older generation, right? And so did you use masks during COVID? Was that something? Or, all these things, they become a source of tension. And we become this neurotic society that is extremely sensitive to even these little things. So even in the therapy room, I have to be very cautious when I talk to my clients, right, about anything. You raise any concerns, you start talking about a television show, you have to be careful where you watch that show, on what channel, right? So, because immediately you might lose trust there. So you have to be very careful and cautious when you engage with even your clients, especially your clients, right? And so I think, this division and tension is impacting our personal lives and certainly our mental health, right? And there are many who are deeply troubled and really traumatized by this tension. And so we see the tension here on the right side, we see the trauma, and we see here we want to increase resilience and fluidity in this context. And we see how these forces, they interact all with one another. And, we define ourselves accordingly to whatever impact, whatever movement and changes are happening in our society, in our culture. So in order for us to create, resilience, to make our children more resilient, right, we have to have strong homes. We have to have strong faith. We have to have excellent schools. And we really have to embrace our children, because this world is really not a place, it's a very traumatizing world we live in today. So, but if we can build this fortress around these lives in a way that we can raise them in a healthy way, we can do this, right? And we can change this society and this world. And that's what we are obviously called to do, as we know. So just I just am going to go a little bit through the history of how things have changed. And so we have the macro level, just the level of invasion of fear and toxic stress, how that happens. We have right in the beginning of 2000, we have 9/11. Then in 2008, a global financial crisis. And then 2010, sudden mental health crisis among young people and teenagers. And that is due to, I think, partly because, well, we know the smartphones definitely kicked in at that point. And a lot of people have seen the documentary on Netflix. I think it's called The Social Dilemma, I think it's called. It really talks about the impact and how these algorithms or all these different elements are sort of connecting young people, really making this becomes an addiction. And not only young people, it certainly is relevant for the older today, but we know that we have, most of us have fully formed brains and our prefrontal cortex, and we have impulse control that children don't have. So with all this, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then we have COVID and the indoctrination. And so you see there's almost like a pattern here, 2001, 2010, 2020, and the question mark, what's going to happen in 2030? I don't know, but it certainly raises a lot of questions, right? So adverse childhood experience, that's one of the things that is one of the most amazing, I want to say, studies that has been done. It was Kaiser that did it back in 1995. And what they did, they sent out 25,000 questionnaires. Of those, 17,500 answered those questionnaires, and they answered questions that had to do with things like, I'm going to go straight to that. They did ask questions like, did a parent or other adult in your household often swear at you, make you afraid? Did parent or other adult in the household push, grab, slap, ever hit you so hard that it made marks on or you were injured? Did an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you ever touch, fondle you, or have any sort of a sexual, touching? Was there any fondling going on? And so it goes into asking also, did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Number 5, did you often feel like you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Was your mother or stepmother often pushed, slapped, or thrown, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife? Number 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic, or who used street drugs? Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And finally, did a household member go to prison? So they sent out this questionnaire, and you see what they're measuring. These are really critical things. And for those who scored 4 or more on this test, there was a lot of issues that these people were facing. So I'm going to take you back here to this definition. So what really is toxic stress? So once people had scored 4 or more on this particular assessment, we kind of had an idea how that impacted the brain and the central nervous system. So repeated or prolonged activation of child stress response without the buffering protections of a trusted nurturing caregivers, and safe, stable environments leads to long-term changes in the structure and functioning of the developing brain, metabolic, immune, and neuroendocrine responses, and even the way DNA is read and transcribed. So it's really interesting to think just that how this seriously impacts our whole body. And we know that when you are traumatized, it's really stored up in various places in your body. And so that the trauma lives in your body. And there's an excellent book that, if you haven't read it, called The Body Keeps the Score, written by Bessel van der Kolk. And he kind of really brought the trauma to the forefront in the field of both neuroscience and psychology. So this is obviously, this has to do with, adverse childhood experience, has to do with components like maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, homelessness, incarceration, mental illness, divorce, physical and emotional neglect, and those who are there underneath, these who were experiencing poverty, discrimination, community disruptions, lack of opportunity, economic mobility, and social capital, these were more likely, obviously, to experience trauma. And so, this kind of an environment is obviously, as we can imagine, very hostile to children to grow up in. So, early life adversity impacts the neuro, the endocrine, and the immune, and that's the toxic stress. So what really happens is that when you are afraid, we have this lovely response that our body begins to pump adrenaline and cortisol and other things that puts us into a fight, flight, flee response. So we are supposed to experience that when something is coming at us, like a tiger or a lion, we are supposed to fight or we are supposed to flee. So that's or we faint. There's also a faint response that actually can happen. I think that's probably the best one when I think about it. So, but if you think about it, when you have been traumatized as a child, experiencing 4 or more, now this system is completely dysregulated, and you're basically you're activated and triggered over and over again when you're even watching a Netflix show or you're eating dinner at home. And that goes into your life and into your adult years because it's never been really dealt with. So the trauma lives inside of you. The war from your childhood lives inside your body. And this begins to have very deep impact in your health. And so it really messes up with the endocrine, the metabolic, the reproductive systems, the neurological, psychiatric, and behavioral, immune, inflammatory, and cardiovascular components of our bodies. And so this is extremely interesting. So when you look at this here, so this is done in 1995. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is before digital, before the internet, right? Nothing is measured that happens online. So I'm going to get to that. But just take a look. These are the leading causes of death in the United States. We have heart disease, cancer. So those who score 4 or more on ACEs, adverse childhood experience, are 2.1 times more likely to have heart disease. They are 2.3% more times more likely, 2.3 times more likely to have cancer. Accidents, unintentional injuries, 2.6 times more likely. Chronic lower respiratory disease, 3.1. Stroke, 2.0. Alzheimer's or dementia, 11.2 times more likely. Diabetes, 1.4. Influenza and pneumonia risk is unknown to that. Kidney disease and suicide, 37.5. So when I have somebody coming in and I know that they score high, when I have a client coming in for the first time, I give them the ACEs test and I know, according to the score, where they stand. And I know that I always check out their trauma story first. I always kind of map out where do you stand, because I know that when there's a lot of trauma, We know that we organize our relationships, both with ourselves and with others around us, accordingly. We develop coping mechanism, and it messes with pretty much every part of our being. So when we talk about depression, anxiety disorders, well, we got to look at the trauma. And if that trauma is consistent, that we call complex PTSD today, if it's consistent, it definitely does its number on us as human beings, both in every area of life. And it's very interesting to read Genesis chapter 3, because we think the Bible doesn't really talk about these things, but the Bible does. At the fall, man fell from in every area. It was a physical fall, it was emotional, spiritual, and mental. So the first thing that happens is that when man realized in that state that he had been disobedient, he hid because of shame, and he felt fear. He was afraid. So these are the first negative emotions documented in the Bible, and it's trauma. And I find it very fascinating just to think about it from that perspective. But also, just to give you, we are 12.5 times more likely to develop depression when we have experienced adverse childhood experience growing up. And we score high. So it matters. So this is, of course, compared to those who score 0, who have not any experience. This is the comparison. So 4 or more, you are in a very high risk of. And basically, your life expectancy is cut down 20 years. That's a known fact. 20 years. So I was thinking, when I thought about ACEs, and I've been giving a lot of people this, and I was thinking about my lecture, I thought, okay, so what is that? How would we really, what kind of questions would we ask young people today? Because yes, they're dealing with everything that we are dealing with from 1995, but we also have a lot of other components that are so threatening to their well-being. And we have very few really tools to protect them. And so now it's not only inside the home, but it's the forces that want to break into the home. And so here are some of the questions that I thought about. Let's see if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. Mark, can you put down the questions? There you go. So have you ever experienced cyberbullying or online harassment? Well, that's a question, right? That's going to be asked probably in the future. Have you ever received unsolicited, explicit content or messages online? Have you ever been a victim of online scams or fraud? Have you ever been exposed to inappropriate or harmful content online? Have you ever felt pressure to share personal information online? Have you ever experienced online stalking or unwanted attention? Have you ever been involved in online conflicts or arguments? So these are kind of these things, if you just kind of go back to the questions, this is just a little tip of the iceberg that children today are experiencing. And I wonder, how much do we know? How much are we connected? Because they don't want to share this. Because if they share this, right, the phone will be removed. They will be socially isolated. So they're always in this tension. And the question is, how do we connect with them? And I'm going to go into that a little bit later. So the other side of the trauma is shame-based identity. So when we are traumatized, we will develop shame. And that means helplessness, worthlessness, inferiority, self-hatred, shame-bound identity, imposter syndrome. Those of you who don't know what that is kind of the fear to be found out, feeling like a fraud, right? Perfectionism. So these are kind of the things that, just few of them. And so we always know that when you've been traumatized, there's always going to be the other side of that. It's going to be shame. And when we develop shame-based identity and we take that into life with us, we are going to be always compensating because we're never going to be good enough. We're always going to be compensating for not being this or being that. And so it creates a lot of problems later on. So I just took some numbers here. The US teens who had a major depression, this is from 2020, so it's not last year, but it shows that alike, Gen Zers, but we have also alike actually, there's a guy, his name is Jonathan Haidt, and he wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And he mentioned in that book, I want to highly recommend that book. It's a really great book, must read for everybody. The Coddling of the American Mind. He basically talks about the internet generation, the iGen, not Gen Z. These are young people that never known life without the internet. Screen has always been in front of them from the beginning. And so you see that girls, they score very high, and this happens, interestingly enough, right? Smartphones, they are on the market in 2007. In about 2010 till 2012, this takes off into a whole different dimension. And you see how sharp that goes. There is a direct connection between smartphones and depression and mood disorders in both boys and girls. Now, the reason for the difference, some people might wonder about that, is because girls are more vulnerable because of the hormonal changes, of other things that are happening in their body. So this is ER visits. So I don't know if you see this well, but in 2009, you see it's just like it becomes like the north wall of Mount Everest for females, just how it grows. And we have 600 ER visits, per 100,000 after that. So it's like this is such an alarming number that we are looking at here. And then lonely at school. Now, this is something that I want to address a little bit in a broader context, loneliness. So loneliness, I want to say that's one of the pandemics that we're dealing with today in our culture. Young people, they don't really know how to relate. And older generations really don't either. So this loneliness in school is an interesting thing, right? Because this is not just the United States, this is kind of the whole world. And you can see from 2009, from 2015, I want to say from 2012 to 2015, there's a sudden rise with all these countries, different continents. And this is a really concerning for all of us, this development. But I also want to tell you that Cigna is a major player in the insurance world, as you all know, and they did a loneliness survey of 20,000 adults ages 18 and older. They found that on the loneliness scale, ranging from 20, less lonely, to 80 and very lonely, they found that 54% of people surveyed felt no one knew them well. 54% of these. 46% reported feeling alone, with 47% feeling left out. 43% lacked companionship. 43% felt their relationship weren't meaningful. 43% felt isolated from others. 39% no longer felt close to anyone. 59% felt like their interests and ideas weren't shared by others. 36% didn't feel like they had anyone to turn to. Now, this is the adults. So if the adults are lonely, what's happening to our kids? Have we lost the ability to relate? I think so. As a relationship expert, I truly believe we have lost that ability, and we are losing that because our brains are changing. We know that smartphones, we know that screen time is changing the way our brains are structured, our ability to connect with others, and I believe, our ability to show others empathy and understanding. We are losing that ability. And that is something that I almost think the educational system needs to consider. Do we need to change the way that we work with the children? Do we have to teach them empathy? And be very intentional about that. I think that might be a good, at least beginning to talk about it, good dialogue between parents and schools. So what it really tells me, when I think about these numbers, these alarming numbers of loneliness in the world today, I think about, we live in a society, in a world where people don't feel seen, they don't feel heard or understood. And I'm thinking about, but what about the church? Now, I can go here on for an hour or more easily, so I'm not going to do that to you. But there's something missing in our churches, right? And to just kind of throw that in there, that's one of the reasons why Saga Mental Health and Relationship Centers was founded, is because I was a pastor myself, and I'm a therapist today. I understand the relational world. I understand families. I know how people relate, and I understand also what's happening in the churches. There's a great need, and churches don't know how to relate to one another. We don't know how to connect as the body of Christ. And that is a very sad development and scary development, because I think a lot of churches, they have become so focused on being seeker sensitive that they lost the depth and the ability to go deeper into relationship and what true communion means. Like I said, I can go on here for a long time, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. And so this is all connected also to that, obviously, the usage, right? How long time do you spend? And they were showing that if you're checking, this is for 9th to 12th graders, and those who kind of spend from more than 2 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, you can see that the risk of their suicidal factors will come into it. And depression is also, symptoms of depression begin to develop the longer you use the phone or electronic device. So I want you to I want to ask you a question right now, because I want to move into COVID and what COVID did to us. So as parent, what specific challenges did you find most difficult to navigate during the COVID-19 pandemic? And I'm thinking about your children. I'm thinking about your family life. And if you take 1 minute, just kind of a 2 and 2 together, that would be great. And I would like to hear some responses. So let's give it 1 minute, and I'm going to connect with you in 60 seconds. Okay, I better stop now, because otherwise it will be a very long minute. Okay. I'm sure you had a lot of thoughts about that. So is anybody willing to share with me what they were faced by? What was the most challenging thing that you found? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. So screen time was the most difficult, because that created that. What did it create? What happened? How did it impact her? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a great point. Mm-hmm. It's a very uh, reasonable concern. Anyone else? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a good point. That's a great point. So, um, so I jotted down some points, and I think things like disrupted routines. COVID led obviously to the closure of schools and cancellation of all kinds of activities and limited interactions. And this disruption of usual routines and activities may have caused teenagers really to question their sense of identity. And as they were unable to engage in the activities that typically define who they are and shape our lives. And also increased reliance on virtual communication, just like you were saying. It's such an important thing. And with social distancing measures in place, many teenagers had to rely on communication platforms to connect with friends, right, and family and classmates. And this shift to online interactions may have affected their social development for sure, and sense of self. A face-to-face interaction and nonverbal cues are important for building relationships, as we know. And that became a big thing. It became a very political thing, actually, as we know. How is that going to impact the developing brain of children? And so loss of milestones and experiences. COVID resulted in the cancellation of and postponement of important milestones and experiences for teenagers, such as graduations and ceremonies and college visits. And I certainly felt that. Yes, jump in. Yes. Absolutely. It was a toxic stress. I'm sorry, I missed that. That's right. Yes. That's right. That's right. There was like the neurosis in our society went through the roof. I mean, it was just like everything became, there was no way to, they didn't really have the ability to regulate really at that point. It was this intense fear that came over the nation. Yeah, it was. And the horrifying thing is that this development of fear, or this, I want to say, propaganda of fear, was driven by these forces in our society. And there was a lot of people that became extremely rich, right? As a consequences of the fear propaganda. Yeah. Exactly. And that's exactly right. This is where the social contract was broken, for sure. And I don't know how we're going to do to mend this again. I believe we need the revival and we need the reformation, both. That happened in South Korea back in the 50s. And we need that for sure today in this nation to rebuild trust amongst each other and learn to really get to the basics of loving each other. Yeah, great that you're bringing up these points. I love that. And then mental health challenges, we know that. That's what we're talking about. The pandemic took certainly a lot of time, toll on mental health and many teenagers. And this whole idea with, we know that, even as if you go back into developmental psychology, and we talk about somebody like Erik Erikson, who created this amazing work, who's a really big name as a developmental psychologist, we know that during these years of these formative years, from when you're 12 to maybe 19, 21, you're forming your identity as a person. That, otherwise, if you're not able to do that, then it creates role confusion. You don't really know who you are, and your identity becomes something that is, if we don't, because we are constantly throughout our life, we are developing our identity. We are learning who we are, and it's not like I finished it at this phase in life. It's an ongoing process to develop our identities, and we take on different roles as such. But that is such a critical phase because of the developing brain, right? And because we have a central nervous system that's developing too. And so social influence and indoctrination. And I want to say that this is probably one of the most disturbing developments during COVID. I was thinking about the word indoctrination. I took, doc and nation. So I thought, the prevalence of mental health issues has been on the rise, prompting concerns about the normalization of such conditions such as transgenderism. This is a very sensitive topic. I'm fully aware of that. And there's a lot of hurting people. But just to give you insight into this, in 2007, gender dysphoria is something we have known about. It's been, that's a reality. But here's the problem. In 2007, there was one clinic in the United States. Guess how many clinics we have today? We have 300 clinics today, all around this nation. And it has 5,000 times folded over the last just recent years. And so this is incredible. And so as I was thinking about this thing, I actually Googled Dr. Miriam Grossman. This is a picture of her. She has been sounding this alarm for a long, long time. And what she did, she actually wrote a book back in 2009 called Lost in Transnation. And then she wrote another book. I want to remember what that book is called. I for whatever reason, You're Teaching My Child What? And that came out very early on. And so we are having someone who is talking about this, has a long experience. She is incredibly well educated and respected as a researcher and psychiatrist. So Mark, why don't you go ahead and play this little video there.
Most notably, Lisa Littman, a physician researcher at Brown University. So she came out with a study in 2018, a very important study. She noted that at that point there were now these parent groups online of parents of kids who suddenly, without any previous indication that they were uncomfortable with their sex. In fact, they might have been the most boyish of boys and the most girly girls, suddenly making an announcement that they are either the opposite sex or they're non-binary. Non-binary meaning that they're neither male nor female. And these parents, were just blindsided. They just didn't know what the heck is this about. And they would take their kids to gender therapists, and the gender therapist would say, this is a thing, and we're going to affirm you don't have a daughter now, you have a son. And when these parents would say, hold it, just hold everything. This is my child. I know my child. I know that my child is, for example, on the spectrum, or was having trouble in school, or my child was molested a few years ago. Like, I know my child. And the gender therapist would say, well, if you are not going to accept your daughter as your son, you're the problem. And they would often say this after 1 or 2 meetings with the family, and they would say it in front of the child. So these parents would grab their child and run, but they didn't know where to go. So they began to find one another online, and they were anonymous online because a lot of them were scared to put their name on this and admit that they were questioning the process, because wherever they turned, whether it was their gender therapist or their guidance counselor at school or their pediatrician, they were told that their reaction is transphobic and that only their daughter knows who she is, and that if they continue to reject their son, and they don't go along with their child's new identity, they are going to increase the chance of their child committing suicide. I've talked to a lot of these parents, and I continue talking to them. And this has been, for most of them, the most difficult thing they've ever gone through in their lives. This destroys families, destroys marriages. The child is so indoctrinated that the child is led to believe that if their family, their parents, doesn't get on board with this, then their home isn't safe. Their parents are toxic, and they really may want to think about leaving. So Lisa Lippman's study in 2018, she surveyed 126 parents and asked them a bunch of questions. And she was able to conclude, that this was a certain demographic. First of all, unlike the earlier group of kids that were studied in the Dutch protocol, they were mostly boys. These kids were mostly girls. They were mostly girls, identified as transgender or non-binary, along with or somewhat after a number of their friends did. So they were in friend groups who also had, friends of theirs had also identified as being transgender. And a large number of them had spent enormous amounts of time online. And this is where transgenderism and the COVID lockdowns start to intersect. So the COVID lockdowns with kids not going to school and being online 24/7, either with friends or with or watching YouTube videos and being on other platforms, they were being exposed to these ideas about transgenderism. And there are hundreds of influencers on YouTube and on other platforms that are describing their journeys and their transition from male to female or female to male. And, I went on estrogen today. I'm so excited. My breasts are growing, or I'm growing facial hair. I can't believe it. This is the best thing that ever happened to me. So in Lisa Lippman's study, the kids were also found to have spent a large amount of time on social media.
Great interview, by the way. I would definitely recommend that you would watch the whole interview if you're interested in this. This is
There's
incredible.
one simple vision hack anyone can use to improve vision.
So somebody's taking over here. So this is when I want to say the normalization of what we have really thought of as a mental health issue has been happening. And this is creating I don't really know the word for it, but it's really creating a form of hell in a way for a lot of families and for a lot of parents. And a heartbreaking thing, I had a father who called me because of his 18-year-old son. And he said, my son went away. He came back 3 weeks later. And now he's raised in the church. We are a Christian family. And he thinks he's a woman. And he thinks he's in the wrong body. And he said, as a father, I really don't know what to do. Can I trust the organization that you started, Saga? Can I trust that the therapist that I will pick from there, or is somebody who honors the Bible and the Word of God? And I said, we have screened and we have vetted all our therapists. They have gone through. They have to be affirmed into the organization. So we screen them very carefully, and we have ethics codes that they have to align with. And so in our organization, we do not condone or advocate for something that contradicts the Bible or biblical worldview. And it's really important to have a trusted source. I did not, it's one of those things in life, and I want to move into that a little bit. It's one of those things in life where I felt like I was really called to start this. And it happened in a way that, I was in my private practice. I was doing just fine. I had been in the ministry. I was ready to ride into the sunset. This is it. I'm going to retire at some point. But in 2019, I had a knock on my door. And to make a very long story short, Saga came into existence. And we are now recruiting therapists, Christian therapists, into our network. We're also offering support for pastors. Pastors, because we know that both pastors and pastors' family, they are suffering. And we also want to meet the fatherless pandemic in our culture today. The fatherless pandemic is really the root cause of so many problems and really the decline of the church today. Isn't that interesting? And I think the fatherless pandemic is the root cause for this too. So we are dealing with single parents' homes. And so how can we support them? I believe with Saga is a nonprofit organization. I believe that we can, if we can build scholar funds to support families, single parents' homes, to go to therapy, and find support through Christian care. I think that could be an incredible source for us. And I say to the Lord, this is yours. You give the growth, and I will just go along as long as you want me to go along with this. But I believe in this vision. I believe this is such a critical time for us, and to connect with Liz and Trinity and just begin the conversation of, hey, how can we come alongside each other? How can we connect, and how can we support even each other? Because on my end, I have clinical licensed therapists who are experts in so many different areas, have subject matter expertise in so many different areas. And here we have obviously families that need support, and I think a lot of them do. We all do, right? And so I just wanted to use this opportunity to kind of bring you in on what Saga. If you're curious to know more about Saga, you can kind of Google just sagacenter.org, and you can see what we are about. So what can we do? I just really quickly just want to run down a few things. We have to create safety in the home. And we have to learn to de-escalate anxiety in our family. That's one thing. And that's something that I can talk about for another hour, but I'm not going to do that because you will all just fall asleep. And there's an intervention that Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is a Harvard, he's part of the Harvard team. He said, take time out to go time in. What he meant by that is that as adults, let's learn to self-emotion regulate. Let's learn to bring down the anxiety in our homes. Let's listen to our children. Let's connect with them before we start correcting them. And I think we turn that around all the time. And, we start correcting, and then we think we can somehow, win them over. We won't. We have to connect with the world, what's really truly happening, and we have to create this non-anxious, positive presence in our homes. And we have to be extremely intentional about that as parents. What was that? Was the last one there? Yeah. And so there's another dialectical behavior therapy talks about what bridges do you need to burn and what bridges do you need to build? Because we always talk about bridges, right? To burn them, we don't want to burn the bridge. But there are so many bridges that we need to burn today. And it is a really good conversation to think about what bridges do we need to burn and to work with that metaphor. Teach empathy. Japanese schools have done an amazing job of teaching empathy. Teach cognitive behavior therapy. Teach, and I know I'm talking Ramquist love language right now because I know that she is a specialist in cognitive behavior therapy, right? Isn't that yes, Elizabeth Ramquist? So I think if we can begin to teach the basics like thought distortions, there's a lot of thought distortions that happen all around us, that all or nothing, catastrophizing. Everybody knows what it means to call on WebMD. You have a shoulder pain. Oh my gosh, I see my funeral. And, I know that this is probably, so we all catastrophize and that probably one of the most dangerous ones today, thought distortions, is the comparison trap. And that means you go online, you see on social media somebody who's doing so great, that means that I must be miserable. And so it becomes this all or nothing thought processes that we can actually teach children that it's not about that. And then when we realize that we are on the wrong, with the wrong thoughts in mind, then we can make interesting and increase independent play. That's another one. We have lost the ability to play. And there's actually a lot of things being discussed about that. When children lose the ability to play, how does that impact their brains? When we know that is where the imagination, the prefrontal cortex, all these different things, they evolve in that part of the brain. So to teach them, we have a lot of paranoid parenting going on today, helicopter parenting. And I remember I was just thinking about how a lot of kids are being dealt with today. It's pretty incredible. When I was growing up, I was 16 years old, and my parents drove me to the airport in Iceland, the international airport. There was no phone. And I flew to Luxembourg in the Central Europe. I stayed at a hotel. I took a train the next day over to Switzerland, stayed at another hotel there, and I went all the way to the east end of what was West Germany back then. And I'm thinking to myself, that is a form of crazy making, just to think about that was actually accepted back then, because parents, right, would be coming unglued if they thought about their kids, that no cell phones, nothing. And I'm thinking, what were they thinking? I finally just want to end kind of on this note here, that biblical mentoring, and I think I have need to go into keep up with. So biblical mentoring in 1 Thessalonians 2:1, 6-13, it says here, this is probably one of the most beautiful places that I can find in the Bible about really the family and the role of a father, mother, and a father. Brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. And we also thank God continually because when you received the word of God, which you heard from us, you accepted it not as a human word, but as it actually is, the word of God, which is indeed at work in you who believe. So this kind of brings to the forefront this incarnational, that our visit to you was incarnational, being present with our children. We were present with you like a mother, gentle, giving our lives, like a father, encouraging, comfort, and urging. So think about that, encouraging, comfort, and urging. Continually thankful because the word of God, the living word, the written word, was at work in their lives, transforming and informing them. So I actually have a thought. And when I was thinking about this talk today, I thought, obviously because I work in the world of therapy, I thought, why are we as Christians always on the defense? Why do we allow the culture to take our children one by one? Why don't we turn this narrative around? It's time to start warring this. And one of the ways that I know how that can happen is by being proactive. And I thought, getting ahead of the culture, have you considered family therapy as a preventative measure? And I'm not saying that because I need business. Trust me, there's a lot for therapists to do today. They're very, very busy today. So, but what does that mean to actually get ahead? And I can tell you, I have had a lot of families coming my way. And I sit with the parents and I sit with the whole family, and the therapist becomes kind of like this anchoring presence to help communicate, help work through different things. And then I might have the teenager come in and share all his troubles, because I tell you what, I don't work with teenagers and I don't work with kids, but I work with families, because I know that when I have the teenager, I just have to meet the parents. And when I meet the parents, I know what the problem is, right? And so it's all interconnected. So when the family comes together and they work together to just make little adjustments here and there or communicate better, there's a miracle that happens. It truly is. And when it's a Christian, solid Christian counseling that goes on, it's probably one of the best investments families can do. Because we have to learn our role oftentimes of how to be a father, how to be a mother. And I'm under construction with that one constantly. And I think my children have probably taught me much more about fatherhood than I learned from my own father, because I kind of grew up in a way in a fatherlessness myself. I grew up with an alcoholic father who was a loving man, but he didn't know how to father or mentor. So when he wasn't drinking, he was working, right? So I experienced that. So I thought to myself, what about if we really truly learn how to engage with our children? Because we have to engage. This is a living relationship that we have with each individual, and every relationship in the family, whether it's our relationship with our daughters or our sons, these relationships are changing us if we allow them to change us. And I believe that's where God is. God is in relationships. He is in the transformation of those relationships that stand nearest to us. What's more important? So if you have a wise counsel coming alongside of you before trouble hits, it's really worth considering. And I think to myself, well, how much are they investing in baseball? How much are they investing in sports? It's probably much, much more than taking a weekly session for some time and just beginning to develop healthy family structure. So that's one of the things that I can highly and strongly suggest. And I have both benefited from therapy, and I have family members that are benefiting from therapy. So we are all on this journey called life, and we are relational beings. And because relationships, meaningful relationships, are under attack today, we need to find a place where we know and learn how to relate to one another. And so I told you about Saga. Please visit our website. I would really appreciate that if you took a time, because I can tell you this organization, in order for this organization to really grow and take off, we need people who are willing to support us. And that's one of the things that I would encourage you. If it was only, a couple of dollars a month, it helps, because that's what we are. We want to help churches. We want to help families. We want to help bring something to the forefront of supporting single parents and so on. And so by the book, how I started this lecture today, how it spoke to me was through Jesus' words in Matthew 7. So then everyone who hears my words and puts them into practice is like a wise man. He builds his house on the rock. and the rain comes, the water rises, the wind blows, and beat against that house. But it does not fall. It's built on the rock. But everyone who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man. He builds his house on sand. The rain comes down, the water rises, the wind blows and beat against that house, and it falls with a loud crash. We have to build our lives on this. Jesus Christ is the rock, and we have got to walk close to him today. That's my encouragement to you as a former pastor and as a licensed therapist today. I just so much want to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. I know it's been quite long, and I know it's not easy to listen to this, but hopefully it leaves you with something to take home, to think about. And I want to just use the opportunity to thank Liz and you all for inviting me and taking the time. I really appreciate that. It's been great. It's because it's been really long since I was in the pulpit. It's been a long time. So, thank you.